The story begins with a young man named Ryan, who has always dreamed of living a life of luxury, but has never been willing to put in the hard work to achieve it. Born into a middle-class family, he grew up watching wealthy people drive expensive cars, wear designer clothes, and travel to exotic destinations. He resented his own reality, where every dollar had to be earned through sweat and effort. Ryan had tried several jobs, but nothing satisfied him. He hated the idea of working a 9-to-5 job for the rest of his life. He wanted wealth, but he wanted it fast and without struggle. He often scrolled through social media, enviously looking at influencers, celebrities, and businessmen who had everything he desired. One evening, as he sat in a dimly lit apartment that he could barely afford, a thought crossed his mind. Why struggle when there were people out there with more money than they could ever spend? People who were lonely, desperate for love, and willing to share their fortune with someone who could give them attention. That's when the idea struck him. Marrying a wealthy older woman seemed like the perfect shortcut to the life he wanted. He had heard stories of young men who charmed rich women and lived in mansions without ever having to work a day. He convinced himself that love didn't matter. Only security and comfort did. He started researching wealthy women in his city, paying attention to high-end charity events, business gatherings, and online forums where affluent individuals socialized. He even practiced his charm in front of a mirror, perfecting his smile and deepening his voice to sound more confident. Ryan knew he had to act carefully. He couldn't just approach any wealthy woman. She had to be vulnerable, someone who would fall for his charm easily. He studied their habits, reading interviews and social media posts. Then, after weeks of searching, he finally found her, his perfect target. She was in her late 50s, a widow who had inherited a massive fortune after her husband passed away. She owned multiple properties, had no children, and seemed to crave companionship. Ryan's heart raced as he realized that this was his golden opportunity. If he played his cards right, he would never have to worry about money again. With his plan in place, he prepared to make his first move. The woman's name was Eleanor Sinclair, a widow in her late 50s who had inherited a vast fortune from her late husband, a real estate tycoon. Despite her immense wealth, Eleanor lived a relatively quiet life. She wasn't the flashy, attention-seeking type. Instead, she spent her days managing charitable foundations, attending art galleries, and occasionally hosting elegant dinner parties. Eleanor had never remarried after her husband's passing. Though she had admirers, mostly men of her own age, she had never found someone who truly made her feel alive again. Deep down, she was lonely. Her fortune brought her everything except genuine companionship. She longed for meaningful conversations, laughter, and the kind of attention she once had when her husband was alive. Ryan had studied everything about her. He knew what she liked, what charities she supported, and even which cafes she visited. He made sure to be at the right place at the right time, striking up a random conversation with her at a high-end art exhibition. He played his role perfectly, polite, intelligent, and just charming enough without seeming too eager. At first, Eleanor was cautious. She had seen enough people try to take advantage of her wealth, but Ryan was different, or at least he seemed to be. Unlike the usual wealthy businessmen she interacted with, Ryan was young, full of energy, and passionate about life, or so he made her believe. He spoke about art, literature, and travel, topics that intrigued her. He listened to her with genuine interest, making her feel valued in a way she hadn't in years. Over the next few weeks, their encounters became more frequent. Ryan would send her thoughtful messages, surprise her with books he knew she'd love, and accompany her to events where she often felt out of place alone. He wasn't just a man flirting with an older woman. He made her feel seen, desired, and special. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt excited about something other than her work. She started looking forward to their conversations, their walks through the park, and the way he made her laugh effortlessly. He never brought up money, never asked for anything, another calculated move on Ryan's part to appear genuine. Her friends noticed the change in her, some of them warning her to be careful. But Eleanor, blinded by the attention and warmth she had longed for, ignored their concerns. After all, wasn't it possible that someone could truly care for her beyond her wealth? As Ryan continued his carefully crafted act, he knew one thing for sure. She was falling for him, and soon he would have everything he had ever wanted. Their relationship moved quickly, exactly as Ryan had planned. Within just a few months, Eleanor was deeply in love. She had spent so many years alone that the warmth of companionship felt intoxicating. Ryan, always attentive and charming, made her feel youthful again. He whispered sweet words, planned romantic getaways, and ensured she never doubted his devotion. For Ryan, however, every step of this relationship was a calculated move. He had no real affection for Eleanor, only admiration for her wealth and the lifestyle she provided. He viewed marriage not as a union of love, but as a contract, a business deal, where he would trade his time and charm for financial security. As soon as he was legally tied to her, half of her assets would eventually be within his reach. Eleanor, swept away by emotion, saw no reason to delay things. When Ryan suggested they get married, she agreed without hesitation. She had lived long enough to know what she wanted, and she didn't want to waste time. Ryan, of course, pretended to be overwhelmed with joy, acting as though he had never been happier in his life. Their wedding was an elegant but intimate affair. Eleanor chose not to have an extravagant celebration, opting instead for a private ceremony with close friends. Ryan played the part of the devoted groom flawlessly, holding her hands, gazing at her with adoration, and making heartfelt vows he didn't mean. The guests watched with mixed emotions. Some believed Eleanor had found happiness again, while others couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her closest friend Margaret was one of the skeptics. She pulled Eleanor aside before the ceremony, gently questioning whether she was rushing into things too quickly. "Are you sure, Eleanor? He's young, and I don't know. Something doesn't feel right." Eleanor laughed off her concerns. "Margaret, I know what people think, but Ryan is different. He doesn't care about my money. He makes me happy, and that's all that matters." Margaret sighed but said nothing more. She knew Eleanor was too deep into this relationship to see things clearly. As the ceremony concluded and Ryan slipped the wedding band onto Eleanor's finger, he felt a surge of satisfaction. He had done it. He had secured his place in a world of wealth and luxury. But as he kissed his new wife, he wasn't thinking about love or commitment. He was thinking about the bank accounts, the properties, and the life of leisure that awaited him. Meanwhile, Eleanor was looking at him with nothing but love, completely unaware that she had just married a man who saw her as nothing more than a ticket to the life he had always dreamed of. After the wedding, Ryan's life transformed overnight. Gone were the days of struggling to pay rent or worrying about his next paycheck. Now, he lived in a sprawling mansion with staff catering to his every need. He drove luxury cars, wore designer suits, and dined at the most exclusive restaurants. Eleanor, ever generous, showered him with expensive gifts and never questioned his spending. At first, it felt like a dream come true. Ryan travelled to places he had only seen in magazines: Paris, Rome, Dubai. First-class flights, five-star resorts, private yacht parties. His life was now a spectacle of wealth and indulgence. He indulged in the finest whiskey, bought watches worth more than his old apartment, and never hesitated to swipe Eleanor's credit card for the latest trends. But as months passed, the excitement of luxury began to fade. The thrill of shopping, of expensive meals, of endless vacations. It all started to feel routine. Worse, his marriage to Eleanor became suffocating. She was a kind woman, but Ryan had never loved her. At first, pretending to adore her was easy, but as time went on, maintaining the act became exhausting. Eleanor genuinely believed they had found happiness together. She enjoyed their dinners, their quiet evenings by the fireplace, and their walks through the garden. Ryan, on the other hand, found himself growing resentful. She wasn't the youthful, energetic partner he secretly craved. Their conversations bored him, and her affection, once easy to tolerate, now irritated him. He avoided spending time with her when he could, making excuses about work or social obligations. When she expressed concern, he reassured her with empty words, knowing she would believe him. Yet, despite his boredom, he had no intention of leaving. The wealth, the status, the comfort, it was too good to give up. So, he played his part when necessary, smiling at public events, holding her hand at charity galas, and whispering sweet nothings when required. But deep inside, Ryan knew he was trapped. He had gotten exactly what he wanted, but why did it feel so hollow? It was at an upscale cocktail party that Ryan first laid eyes on Sophia, a striking, ambitious woman in her late 20s. Unlike Eleanor, Sophia was full of energy, laughter, and mischief. She wasn't weighed down by responsibility or age. She was a refreshing contrast to the predictable life Ryan had settled into. From the moment they locked eyes, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: desire. Sophia, a socialite with connections of her own, was well aware of who Ryan was. She knew he was married to the wealthy widow, but that only made him more intriguing. She teased him, flirted with him, and made it clear she enjoyed his attention. Ryan, starved for excitement, fell into the game easily. At first, it was harmless: stolen glances, flirtatious conversations, the occasional text when Eleanor wasn't looking. But soon, it turned into late-night meetings, expensive hotel suites, and whispered promises. Ryan felt alive again, intoxicated by the thrill of secrecy. Sophia made him feel young, desired, and most importantly, free. As his obsession with Sophia grew, his patience with Eleanor wore thin. He no longer made an effort to pretend. He avoided dinners at home, stopped holding her hand in public, and dismissed her attempts at conversation with half-hearted nods. When she asked if something was wrong, he would sigh and tell her he was just tired. But in reality, he was fantasizing, imagining a life where Eleanor no longer existed, a life where Sophia sat beside him at those elegant charity events instead. He envisioned himself inheriting Eleanor's fortune and starting fresh with a woman who truly excited him. The more he entertained these thoughts, the more reckless he became. He no longer cared if Eleanor noticed his distance. After all, if she became suspicious, maybe that would push things in the direction he secretly wanted. And then, one evening, Eleanor confronted him. "Ryan, is there something you're not telling me?" she asked softly, searching his face for answers. For the first time, he hesitated. He wasn't ready for her to question him. Not yet. He forced a smile, took her hands in his, and lied once more. "Of course not, my love. You're imagining things." But deep down, he knew the truth. He wanted out, and soon he would find a way to make that happen. Not long after Ryan had fully given his heart and lust to Sophia, something unexpected happened. Eleanor, once so full of quiet grace and patience, started to change. She looked tired, weaker. She complained of feeling dizzy, of headaches that wouldn't go away. Some nights, she barely touched her food. At first, Ryan barely noticed. He was too distracted by his secret meetings with Sophia, too caught up in his daydreams of a future without his wife. But when Eleanor suddenly collapsed at a dinner event, he knew something was seriously wrong. Doctors were called, tests were run, and within days, Eleanor was bedridden. She was pale, frail, and suddenly dependent on him in a way that made his skin crawl. He had never wanted to play the role of a doting husband, and now he was expected to care for a sick wife. The very idea made him restless. Late at night, as he lay in bed beside her, he started to wonder, could this be it? Was fate handing him an easy way out? If Eleanor's condition worsened, if she never recovered, everything would fall into place. He would be a grieving husband, an inheritor of her fortune, a free man. For the first time in months, Ryan felt hopeful. But then, just as he was starting to enjoy the idea of his impending freedom, a lawyer arrived at the mansion, asking to speak with Eleanor. She was too weak, so the lawyer requested to meet with Ryan instead. Ryan, expecting to discuss legal matters regarding her estate, perhaps even an update on his soon-to-be inheritance, agreed without hesitation. But what the lawyer told him shook him to his core. Eleanor had changed her will. She had done it months ago. And in this new version, Ryan was left with nothing. Not a single cent, not a single property. Every asset, every investment, every ounce of wealth he had counted on, gone. Instead, it was all to be donated to charity and distributed to causes Eleanor had cared about for years. Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. His mind reeled, his perfect future crumbling before him. She knew, he realized, his hands tightening into fists. Eleanor had known all along, and now, as she lay weak and silent in their bedroom, he couldn't help but wonder, had she really fallen ill? Or had she been planning something even bigger? Ryan sat in stunned silence as the lawyer's words echoed in his mind. She changed her will. I get nothing. The room suddenly felt suffocating. He'd spent years crafting this plan, years pretending to love Eleanor, enduring a marriage he never wanted, all for nothing. His hands trembled as he forced himself to ask, "Are you sure?" The lawyer, a stern-looking man with sharp eyes, gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Yes, Mr. Carter. Mrs. Sinclair made these changes months ago. She was very clear about her wishes." Ryan could barely breathe. He had been played. Eleanor had known. She had always known. And instead of confronting him, instead of fighting, she had done something far worse. She had trapped him in a marriage that would give him nothing in return. Panic set in quickly. He had no money of his own. Every luxury he had enjoyed, the cars, the private jets, the designer suits, had been funded by Eleanor. Without her, he had nothing. Desperate, he called Sophia. If anyone could make him feel better, it was her. Maybe she would still stand by him. Maybe they could run away together, start fresh. But the moment he told her the news, her voice turned cold. "So, you're broke?" she asked, her tone sharp and uninterested. "It's temporary," Ryan lied, gripping the phone. "She's sick, Sophia. This will all work out." There was a pause. Then she laughed, a cruel, mocking laugh that sent ice through his veins. "You really thought I was in this for love?" she said. "Oh, Ryan, you're as foolish as she thought you were." And just like that, the call ended. His last hope was gone. Ryan sat in the mansion, staring at the walls that would soon no longer belong to him. His world was crumbling, and for the first time in his life he realized he wasn't the one playing the game. He had been the pawn all along. Ryan's downfall wasn't just personal, it became public. In the days following the revelation about Eleanor's will, he spiraled into desperation. He searched for loopholes, scoured legal documents, and even tried to argue with Eleanor's lawyer. But there was nothing he could do. Her fortune was locked away, and he was left with no financial claim. But his problems were far from over. Word spread quickly among Eleanor's inner circle. Friends who had once tolerated him as her charming young husband now saw him for what he was, a gold digger. And worse, some of them had proof. Margaret, Eleanor's closest friend, had never trusted Ryan. Over the years, she had quietly collected evidence, bank statements showing extravagant spending, travel records of his secret meetings with Sophia, even recordings of conversations where Ryan had slipped up, hinting at his real intentions. Now, with Eleanor too weak to fight him herself, Margaret took action. She approached the authorities, accusing Ryan of financial manipulation and fraud. His spending habits were scrutinized, his bank accounts were frozen, and soon, lawyers were circling, questioning whether he had misused Eleanor's funds while she was under his care. Then came the media storm. Wealthy socialites loved gossip, and Ryan's scandalous downfall became headline news. Tabloids painted him as a heartless conman who had preyed on a vulnerable widow. Social media was ruthless. Old photos of him with Eleanor were turned into memes, mocking his failed scheme. Even Sophia, who had abandoned him without a second thought, joined in the mockery. A leaked text exchange between them made its way online, where she had written, "I don't date broke men." Humiliated, broke, and facing potential legal consequences, Ryan realized something terrifying. He hadn't just lost the game. He had become a joke. Ryan thought things couldn't get any worse. He was wrong. One evening, as he sat in the nearly empty mansion, most of the staff had already left, sensing the impending collapse. A knock came at the door. A lawyer stood there, expression unreadable, holding a thick envelope. Divorce papers. Ryan's stomach twisted as he ripped them open, his hands shaking. He had always assumed Eleanor would be too weak, too naive, too in love to ever leave him. But as he scanned the documents, it became painfully clear. She had been planning this for a long time. The papers were airtight. Not only was she divorcing him, but she had also filed for financial misconduct, ensuring he couldn't even fight for a settlement. He would walk away with nothing. His anger boiled over. He stormed into Eleanor's bedroom, where she lay propped up against silk pillows, still frail, but with an unmistakable gleam in her eyes. "You planned this," he accused, voice shaking. "You knew all along." Eleanor gave him a weak smile, one that sent chills down his spine. "Oh, Ryan," she sighed. "You thought you were playing me? I was playing you." The room spun. Ryan could hardly process her words. "I knew from the beginning what you were after," she continued. "You think you were the first man to see me as a bank account? Please. I let you think you had control because I wanted to see how far you'd go. And you didn't disappoint." His chest tightened. You changed the will before we even got married," he realized. Eleanor nodded. "I knew you'd try to outlast me, so I made sure you had no reason to. And the best part," her smile widened, "I never really loved you, Ryan. I just enjoyed watching you squirm." Ryan's knees nearly gave out. He'd spent years plotting, years waiting. only to find out he had been the fool all along. The next day, Eleanor went public. A carefully written statement appeared in major publications. She told the world everything, how Ryan had used her, cheated on her, and expected to inherit her fortune. The last line of her statement sealed his fate. He wanted my money. All he got was my pity. Ryan had lost, but worse than that, he had never stood a chance. Ryan had once lived in luxury. Now, he barely had a roof over his head. With Eleanor's divorce finalized and her public statement destroying what little reputation he had left, his fall from grace was swift and brutal. The mansion was no longer his, the bank accounts were frozen, and the fancy cars repossessed. He tried reaching out to old acquaintances, people who had once laughed at his jokes, toasted champagne with him at lavish parties, but no one returned his calls. The social circles that had once welcomed him now shut their doors. And Sophia, she was long gone, now seen on the arm of another wealthy businessman. For the first time in years, Ryan had no one. With no assets and pending fraud investigations hanging over him, he was forced to move into a run-down apartment, far from the high-end world he once belonged to. The man who had once flown first class now counted every dollar, scraping by on whatever odd jobs he could find. At night, he sat alone, staring at the ceiling, replaying every mistake. Did he regret it? Not entirely. He still resented Eleanor, still felt bitterness toward the woman who had outplayed him. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had been blinded by greed, so sure of his own cunning that he never saw the trap closing around him. And now, as he scrolled through social media, seeing Eleanor smiling at another gala, stronger than ever, he realized the most painful truth of all. She never needed him, but he had always needed her. And now, he had nothing. Ryan spent the next few months drifting between meaningless jobs, barely scraping enough together to survive. He had once lived in a world of fine dining, private jets, and designer suits. Now, he found himself eating fast food in a tiny apartment with broken plumbing. The humiliation of it all gnawed at him. He had spent years believing he was the smartest person in the room, the one who could manipulate his way into wealth and security. But in the end, he was the one who had been played. The world had moved on without him. Eleanor thrived in the wake of their divorce. She regained her health, reconnected with old friends, and immersed herself in philanthropy. If she had been heartbroken over their failed marriage, she never showed it. She never mentioned Ryan again. He was nothing more than a footnote in her life. But for Ryan, the stain of his past followed him everywhere. His name was associated with scandal. No respectable business would hire him, and any attempt to claw his way back into high society was met with closed doors. He was toxic, a con man who had been outwitted by his own victim. At first, he burned with resentment. He spent nights replaying conversations, moments where he had been so close to winning. If only he had been smarter, more careful. If only Eleanor had been weaker. His pride refused to accept the truth. But as the months passed, a different thought crept in. What if he had never really won at all? Even at the height of his wealth, when he had everything he thought he wanted, he had been miserable, bored, restless, trapped in a marriage that gave him money but no real happiness. He had chased luxury, but it had never filled the emptiness inside him. And Eleanor, she'd always known who he was. She had played along, let him believe he had power, then crushed him when the time was right. For the first time in his life, Ryan faced an unfamiliar feeling. Shame, not just because he had been caught, but because, deep down, he finally understood. He had wasted years chasing something that was never real. If he had put in half the effort into earning his own success as he had into scheming, he might have had a real life by now. But there was no going back. One day, he saw a news article about Eleanor. She was photographed at a charity gala, standing beside a man closer to her age, who looked at her the way Ryan never had. The article hinted at a new romance, but Eleanor had simply smiled and said, "I'm just happy." Ryan closed the article and stared at his tiny, empty apartment. He'd spent so long chasing someone else's fortune that he had never built anything of his own. Now he had nothing, and for the first time in his life, no one to blame but himself.